hand. So I'm going to have you take that off just a smidge.
This part?
No, use the handle.
Hey, is this
Is that
sufficient?
enough?
Yes.
Just like this in
Yep.
here in my pocket?
You're good, and we're live.
Excellent. Okay, I'm totally winging it now, so it's all good. Hi, everybody. All you people here and all you people out there in the world, welcome. We are live streaming, so please feel free. Does the screen come up right away, Wolf?
The screen.
Meaning so that people can comment? I mean, it's
People
already
can
there.
comment. We're ready to
Okay.
go. We have 3 folks so far.
Okay, so we're going to, I'm going to go do a little lecture, and we're going to take some questions and process. I'm a therapist. The reason I do all this work is the effective spiritual processing part is what I like so much. Come on in. We're live streaming. It's okay. You're literally on camera.
Go around that way. There you go.
Say hi to the world. Yeah, it's all good. So please, you compile some questions, and when we actually process, then we're going to be talking about exactly why it is we're living in a world that we're supposed to not eat off the tree of good and bad. Don't eat off the tree of good and evil. We're supposed to eat off just the tree of life, okay? And so we're going to start by talking about the difference, again, as a therapist, between sympathy and empathy. Now, if I asked you, like, what's sympathy, what's empathy? Sympathy in general, people think is probably a good trait. But I've learned as a therapist, it's a horrible trait. I've come to realize sympathy is basically, it sucks to be you. You are in unfortunate circumstances. I feel your pain. I looked up the definition of sympathy, and it says having a feeling of pity. Well, we don't want that therapeutically, because it's not very helpful to have people think of their circumstances of, gee, I wish this didn't happen. That doesn't help. Empathy, however, is completely different. Empathy is feeling someone else's pain and joining them in their pain and making something of it, right? Actually putting your arm around someone and saying, hey, we can get through this together. Major difference. In 20 years of doing therapy, that's exactly the way we need to approach all our issues and all our challenges in life, okay? So we're going to be talking about empathy and use some really high-level spiritual teachings, including my favorite all-time scripture that works therapeutically. We have to be willing to work it, though, which is Romans 8:28. All things work together for good for those who love God. Now, there's several different parts to that. All things means what?
Good and bad. For
Everything. Okay. Yeah, right. I was just keep going, right? Anything you're going to say, I was going to say yes, yes, yes. All things is pretty inclusive. It means everything. And again, if you're going to be a spiritual person, the Bible's a pretty spiritual text. Paul's a pretty spiritual teacher. And he says all things work together for good for those who love God. This coming from a man who was crucified too. He was in prison for much of his writings. And he wasn't being whiny about it. He wasn't complaining and bitching and moaning, okay? He was recognizing that wherever you go, you can be with Christ. Or you can be with Buddha nature. You can be finding your true self. It doesn't matter where you're at. If you're obsessed with the external, you might not find that. But all things work together. All things means everything. And when we're done with this little lecture, we'll be talking about all things, including whatever adversity you could go through. We're going to try to tackle some of them. I'll go through some of them before we process, including COVID and the pandemic right now. And how does that work? How does that fit in? All things work together, meaning they're somehow connected. Einstein, taught about entanglement 100 years ago. Everything is energetically connected in a way. Well, there's a way to look at this where everything that you're going through, all the various adversities and challenges, good stuff and bad stuff, somehow are working together for good. Now, we're living in a world where we have to think of that world good, not the good and bad of the daily experiences, but the good, the spiritual good, okay? I actually wrote the word good down here, and I accidentally put 3 O's in it. I think that's how we should spell that good. I left it there, right? Good. That is called the tree of life, okay? Anything that's that kind of good in this phrase, in the Romans 8:28, working together for good, is that which is connecting you to your true self. That's the thing that's working together for good, because it connects you to who you really are, to the born again self, to the awakened self, to the true eternal self. So all things work together somehow for that experience of good, for you waking up to be your inner Buddha, to be your inner Christ. All things are working together for that. But he doesn't stop there. He says, for those who love God. What does that mean? Well, things don't work together for good if you don't love God. I mean, the fact of the matter is if you reject the idea of a true self and the spiritual self, and you think there's no spiritual world and you're just obsessed with the physical, and all you can pick up on is stuff that you can see. In Hebrews, it says faith is the evidence of things you cannot see. Okay. If you only are obsessed with things that you can see and you think this world is the end all be all, well, then guess what? All things aren't going to work together for good for you. You're the type of person who's going to demand and you're going to argue with people about how things should be in the physical world. Why my guy needs to be elected president for this reason, because this is how the world should be. Well, that's not for those who love God. That's for those who love the earth, and for those who love people, and for those who are interested in, the ego pursuit of things. But for that, in that case, you're going to lose sometimes. You'll lose elections. You're going to lose relationships. You're going to lose money, and you're going to lose your life. And guess what? That's not good for the ego at all. But for those who love God is a person who's spiritual. And a spiritual person can rest assured that everything that has ever happened to you is actually good with 3 O's, okay? And so we're going to walk through some teachings, but I'm going to first start with a therapeutic way of thinking of this, okay? One of the most powerful things I've ever experienced as a therapist is embracing our emotions, okay? Human beings, especially Americans, hate negative emotions. We don't want to feel bad, and so we like to medicate them away. I work with addiction a lot. Why do people use drugs? Because their lives are so good, or do they feel some sort of pain that they're trying to alter? Well, of course, there's an emotional state we're trying to change. It's why we drink and use drugs, okay? We want to feel differently than what we're feeling. Well, most of that is because we're trying to change an inner state like anxiety, depression, anger, boredom, any one of those things. I want to go party. I'm not having enough fun. I need to add a substance to my body. So there's some state that we're trying to change. Now, in order to do the spiritual process well, and I like to point out, no prophet ever said, find the right weed to smoke, drink the right substance. If you're ever in a place where some teacher is telling you to smoke this or drink that, you're probably in a cult, okay? No spiritual teacher should tell you what to do. Spiritual teachers talk about how to be. There's a major difference, right? And so if it's drinking something or smoking something that you're trying to, or snorting something that you're trying to change who you are and how you're feeling, that's because you don't like your emotions. Well, to get spiritual real fast, to embrace all things work together for good, that includes your negative emotions. It's really simple to understand if you think of how hot stoves work with your hand. You put your hand on a hot stove, what feeling do you get? Pain, right? And what does that pain make you do relatively quickly? Pull your hand off the stove. Makes sense, right? I'm doing something that's dysfunctional. I feel pain, so I should pull away from that. You don't go, wait, this hurts. Maybe I need some painkillers, okay? Or I'm going to put my hand on top of that and make it burn even more so I could get more painkillers. No, nobody thinks that way. You feel the hot stove, you pull away immediately. All of our negative emotions are like that. But instead of pulling away from what we're thinking, like if you're resenting someone, which hurts, instead of pulling away from that towards forgiveness, for example, we sit with it and we let it burn our souls, right? Fear and shame and guilt and all these negative emotions. Instead of recognizing it's like a hot stove for the soul, we put a cinder block on our hands, right? And our souls burn as a result. And that's pain. And that pain is trying to teach you. It's good to have that type of pain. If we started smelling smoke in this room, we'd feel a little fear. And what would we do then? We'd, quickly escape the room. Aren't we glad we have that fear? I don't look for a shot of whiskey to get rid of that fear. Or if a rattlesnake starts slithering up to me and I feel that type of fear, that's good. I don't know how to handle a rattlesnake. If I don't have any fear, I'd go right up to the thing. And aren't you cute? That would be stupid. Thank goodness we have negative emotions. My anxiety about studying for a test makes me study for a test. That's good. I don't want to be late for work. So I get that little tension. It's actually called eustress. It's good for you. Depression, like in my case, experiencing grief, having lost lots of loved ones, especially back in 2002, I went on a journey in which I didn't like the grief feeling. So I went in another direction and I studied the nature of death. And I came across the Tibetan Book of the Dead and the physics of death. And so the pain, that which is grief, pushed me in a different direction. And you've all heard 1,000 times, my resentment towards Tom Brady pushed me towards a concept called mudita. I didn't like watching Tom Brady win it again and again, and I didn't like the jealousy feeling. Mudita is practicing happiness for someone else. The ego hates that. Remember, all of us are burdened with the ego, which is a physical way of seeing the world. And if you see it as separate than your true self and each other as separate, you're going to experience the world in a painful, separate way. That pain will guide you to your true self, which is a unifying way of seeing things, which is being happy for other people. It's why Apostle Paul says, whatever is good, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is true, whatever is excellent, whatever is praiseworthy, think upon these things. So therefore, Tom Brady, good job. You're obviously the greatest of all time. Now, that feels way better than resenting the guy, okay? So we're living in a world where it's very logical when physical things happen to you. Shortness of breath, call the doctor. You know, that makes sense. But when emotional stuff happens to us, we tend to try to avoid and run away from it. Then we have this wonderful line from the Tao Te Ching that says circumstances are going to complete you, okay? We're living in a world where stuff's going to happen and we label it as good or bad. What you can do is trust that stuff and trust your emotions that you're being guided somewhere. You're being guided to look at your circumstances different. So I came across this teaching. Oh, wait, first I want to do these two Bible verses. The Romans 5:3, rejoice. We rejoice in our suffering, says Paul. Again, the guy was condemned to death. And he says, we're going to rejoice in our sufferings. Wow, that's interesting. How many people are good at that? And James, brother of Jesus, says, consider it pure joy when you face adversity of all kinds. Okay, pure joy. Why? Who would consider adversity pure joy? Well, when you know the end game, which is this little drawing I have here, when you know what your destiny is, you would consider it pure joy because your adversity is going to speed up the process. See, you're not the ego you think you are. You're not a physical being like you think you are. You're a spiritual being that had a body slapped on top of you. Then you got a bunch of labels and you think you're a physical being, but you're not, like it says in the Tao. If you think you're a body, you will die. When you know you're not a body, you can't die. When you only identify with this, you think you're a body, you have all the ego trappings that come with it, and now you're going to have pain and suffering. You're also going to have pleasure and joy, which is enticing in a way, but I'm going to read from the Course in Miracles in a bit, that joy is a trap. We're going to talk about why that is. So it's a pure joy for this reason. So what I drew very obviously and clearly, is this clear on the board here?
It's not bad. The only thing we can't see is the Romans part, just because of the glare of the light, just so you know.
Okay.
So anything
That's
above there.
fine.
we
No,
can't
this is
see.
good then. Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
So this drawing, I worked really hard on this. What is this person doing? Excellent. Okay. That the three little dots helped, right? Okay. So this person is bowling. Now, what I want you to think of these two lines as bumpers. You ever go bowling and, you know, you use the bumpers? What is that? And you just did it the other day, right? Okay. What do those bumpers do? They keep you from going into the gutter, right? You stay out of the gutter. So it stays in the lane. Is it more likely to hit the pins? Yeah. Guess what? Your life circumstances are bumpers. None of us could ever go into the gutter. It's impossible in this world that we're in to end up in a place where you can't be saved. Can't happen. No one can go into the gutter, spiritually speaking. Feels like that sometimes. You can't be lost. There's no creator that set up a kingdom that's going to lose one of us to hell. Not going to happen. That's the way the ego or the devil wants you to think, okay? We're in a place, thank you, Buddha, with the eternal nature of things that gives you ample time, eternity, to figure this out. That's cool. Don't worry about it. Don't sweat it, okay? There are no gutters. There are bumpers, however. And Kabbalah has this teaching. Now, I'm probably going to butcher it a little bit, but I want to emphasize again, I'm no master of all these different philosophies. What I see very clearly is the unity in them. And I see the therapeutic value of them, okay? I get criticized by a lot of Buddhists out there who say, he's not a guru, master, teacher. I'm like, yeah, you're right, I'm not. I'm an introductory teacher on some of these topics. If it interests you, go find a guru, okay? And study it. The one thing that I do is see the unity in all of it. And you can pull all these pieces together, and whatever interests you, go study it, okay? So I'm not a Kabbalist expert or anything like that, but I love the concepts, and these concepts can really help facilitate your understanding, okay? And so this is what they teach. They call it the left reject and the right adduct. Left reject, right adduct. Okay, we all know what reject means, okay? To push away. Good way to think of it. What's adduct mean? brought this up to my daughter, and she said, that's like you have a muscle called, and that's an adductor. You know, it twitches and it does something, right? Well, the actual definition is it's movement towards the midline, towards the midline of the body, okay? Well, I drew a bowling alley for you. Now, a perfect strike, don't get technical on me in bowling. I know that you want to hit the front right of the pin, the front pin, right? That's what it is? Okay.
Or the front one.
It's not great to hit it dead on, but this is not a bowling game. This is a life game. If I roll this right down the middle, I have my highest odds of hitting that center pin and knocking down a bunch of pins. Okay, so you want to stay centered. An adduct is movement towards the midline. So if you can visualize how most of our lives tend to feel, tend to be on this side of things, which you can just say the left is the ego side of the mind. Okay, the left is the ego side of the brain. It's the rational thinking, logical part of the brain. The right side is the spiritual part. Why does Jesus say to cast the net to the right side? You know, it's not fishing advice he's giving when he's talking to the disciples. They couldn't get fish on the left side, so he says cast the net to the right, and they throw it to the right to get a bunch of fish. And people are like, wow, what a great fisherman Jesus is, okay? Maybe that happened, but he was definitely talking about the quality of the fish that happen in the right side of your mind, which is the creative side, the spiritual part of your brain, okay? They're both very valuable, and we're going to get to that in the end of this. They're both valuable, but most of us spend most of our time on the left side of the mind. That is the ego side of the mind, and that's where we're going to argue about things. It's quite useful, again, to have a human experience, but it's not the end game. Jesus sat at the right hand of God. Again, we are mostly bowling down this side. Now, here's the good news. When you hit the bumper, what happens in bowling? Bumps it back to the center. When you put your hand on a hot stove, what happens? You pull it away quickly, okay? So you get inspired to action. When a bad thing happens to you, you have a choice. You know, revel in the misery of things, right? Sit around and do nothing, or learn from it. And if you learn from it, you get bumped off the rail. We have to reject that which happens on that side of things. We have to say, this can't be the truth. The pain that I felt through grief, for example, can't be the truth. We can't live in a world where there's a God who sentenced us to all this pain that has no meaning. That can't be the case. And that bounces me off the rail to go look for something else, right? And it can't be the type of world that we live in where we have suffering that has no point to it whatsoever. That can't be the case. We have to look for some sort of meaning in it somehow. Doesn't Jesus then go to the cross to show us that on a very extreme level, right? You could be crucified, tortured, and murdered and still make something of it. So the left reject is the bad stuff that happens to you. It's the adversity that James is talking about. Consider it a joy every time you bounce off the left rail, because that's going to push you closer to the right. Now, it's the center that we're looking for. The right adduct is a movement towards the midline. Now, we're going to call the right good. And when I read from Miracles again, you're going to see I'm doing that for a reason. That's when the world is pleasant, when you're not having adversity. And it pulls you to that side. Remember, most of us, even this group, we're mostly spiritual-oriented people. But seriously, how often are we spiritual-oriented? We'll leave this place and, as soon as a game comes on, I'll be back to thinking I'm a physical being again. Or I go home and see a bill, or, the kids have an issue, or whatever the case may be. And I'll completely forget about spirituality and go right back to the physical world, left side thinking, okay? All of us do it. It happens a lot. But it's a challenge to get ourselves to that midline, that center point, and stay there. And so we start to get pulled, the adduct is to the midline. We start to get pulled to the right where things are much more peaceful. So part of the world, yin yang, part of the world is negative, trying to push you away. You might call that negative reinforcement. And then part of the world is positive, is trying to pull you in. Resent someone for a while, you're going to bang on the left rail. Forgive them, you're going to start coming towards the right adduct. You're going to start going towards the midline again. And you're going to be like, ooh, that feels better. And you're going to know that what's happening on the other side of the brain is the healthier side. Death again. You think of death as the end, and you'll never see your loved one again. Or you believe in this place called hell or whatever. Nobody likes these thoughts. But then you correct and you start moving towards the right adduct, and you have this awareness, or you work on this awareness of, well, maybe there's an afterlife, and maybe it's actually fair, and maybe there's not an eternal lake of fire like I got taught. Maybe something else is going on. And then all of a sudden you start to feel better because you started going closer to the midline again. You start to drift in a good way because you got nudged based upon your life experiences. Remember, the Tao says circumstances complete you. Stuff is going to happen to you that's going to keep nudging you towards this midline. Now, remember, you got two lanes here. You could go flying over here to the right, okay, or two bumpers. You could, and you're going to get bumped back off that bumper too. I like to think of that bumper as the purely spiritual bumper, okay? That you're all spirit and no flesh. That can sometimes be a cult too, right? But on that bumper, now you're not relatable. You're not integrated. What's the point of coming to this world if you don't have a left brain experience? You know, why do we come here and fall asleep? Why do we have to have the experience of like it says in Genesis, Adam was sent into a deep sleep. The dream that we're currently in, which I'm about to read from. Why do we have to have that experience? So that we can have the dream. What if you didn't fall asleep? What if you came here, you're born, and you like realize it was an illusion right away? All of you know that Matrix 4 is coming out in a couple months again, right? So all of us need to watch the first 3 again, but certainly the first one again and again. The continued idea, the themes that we're living in some sort of matrix is becoming more and more clear. Well, what if you knew that when you were 3, 4, 5 years old? What a boring game this would be. You have to fall asleep. If you just stayed on this right bumper the whole time, that's not going to work either. It might be fairly blissful, but you will have wasted your time. Plus, you will have not helped anybody else out because the people over here on the left are just going to think you're purely crazy all the time. So we have teachings again that back this up. Jesus, Matthew 5:10, blessed are the persecuted in righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Okay, so the persecuted is the left. The persecuted is the left reject. The negative stuff you go through. If you think I'm a victim, this is bad, I wish this didn't happen, and all the negative imagery that goes with that, you stay stuck on that rail. But if you pursue righteousness, which is all the virtue, say forgiveness and mercy and hope and all that, if you pursue the detachment from the flesh, as Buddha would teach, and into the true spirit, yours is the kingdom of heaven. I drew that here. We're going to address that in a second. Jesus also says, easier for a camel to fit through a needle than the rich man to get into the kingdom of heaven. You might say the rich man's over here on this side, right? Because everything is good, and he thinks everything is good, and he has no adversities. Why would he look for the midline? Why would he has no negative experiences. He's going to be out of balance too. No physically well-off person who never has any adversity has much motivation to look for the spiritual world. Most people who have it well off aren't interested in this topic. Nobody comes to me saying, my life is so good, I need a therapist. Okay? People start to look into spirituality because their life was very difficult. And so they're way more likely to break free from the ego than the rich man. And again, we're living in a country that's obsessed with the rich guys having all the stuff. And I feel sorry for those rich guys, right? The white privilege we talk about all the time, that ain't no privilege, right? Not according to this, not according to Jesus, right? If we're going to be spiritual, the privileged one is the one who is getting persecuted. Why? Because they're going to find the midline. The person who's on the right here, man, they're going to bounce off the rails. And guess what? They're not going to find center. What happens at the very end of this? Those are bowling pins. Oh, does that look good? Probably not, and it shouldn't. But once we get through the bowling pins, I wrote something here called the narrow gate. And Jesus says we have to enter through that narrow gate. This line would be ego. This line would be ego. If your life just sucks and you say it sucks and you're a victim, ego. If your life is awesome physically and you think you're special because of it, that's more ego. Neither of those people get into the kingdom of heaven. The narrow gate is the midline. The adductor is pulling you in that direction. So it's this type of path for most people. And if you swing too far this way, you're going to get bounced back as well. Eventually, you hit those pins, knock them down, enter through the narrow gate, and there you find the kingdom of heaven. Okay? And that's available to all of us. Problem is, it's a very challenging game. This coming from the Course in Miracles. Remember, Einstein called, and his colleagues often called the world an illusion or a type of an illusion. What does an illusion mean? It does not mean not real. It does not mean it's not here. Illusion means a deceptive appearance. Okay? Illusions exist. Mirages exist too on the horizon. They exist. They're just not what you think they are. Okay. We're in an illusion. The matrix creates an illusion for us, and we're experiencing an illusion that seems so darn real. Okay. Course in Miracles emphasizes how the world's an illusion too. And this incredible page talks about the differences, or the similarities between people who have good physical lives and people who have bad physical lives. And there's not a distinction between them. Listen to this. Dreams are dreams because they are not true. Their equal lack of truth becomes the basis for the miracle. Now, right there, I want to stop already, okay? We're living in a physical world that's not the end game, okay? The end game is this kingdom of heaven. So here's the dream state. Remember, the word Buddha means to wake up. We're living in a dream state. It's an energy illusion, and we think it's physically real, but our bodies are just light bodies, okay? It's a dream state, therefore it's not true. Their equal lack of truth becomes the basis for the miracle, which is getting to the kingdom of heaven, really removing negative emotions, which means that you have understood that dreams are dreams and that their escape depends not on the dream, but only on your awakening. So the quality of the dream is not going to matter. But could it be that some dreams are kept and others are awakened from? Like, do you have some parts of your life that you like, and so therefore you're going to hold on to those parts? And only the suffering you'll release from? The choice is not between which dream to keep, but only if you want to live in dreams or awaken from them, which means you have to give it all up. You have to give up the good too. It's not just giving up the bad. Who doesn't want to give up the bad? I love the idea of giving up suffering, but how about giving up all the awesome stuff too that you think is good? You want to enter through the narrow gate into the kingdom of heaven? You're going to have to detach from that too. And by the way, it doesn't actually mean you have to get rid of all your stuff. You have to detach from it, thank you, Buddha. You have to release its importance to you. You'd have to be okay if you didn't have it. And you especially have to be okay with the idea that it's not you. You don't get credit for it. It might be something you're grateful for. But walking around like you're awesome, that's ego. Look what I did. Look at this kingdom I created and all of that. No. You don't get in the kingdom of heaven. Neither the bad nor the good. That's why we don't eat off that tree. Thus, it is the miracle does not select some dreams to leave untouched. You cannot dream some dreams and wake from some, for you are either sleeping or you are awake, and dreaming goes with only one of these. The dreams you think you would like to hold on to hold you back as much as those in which fear is seen. For every dream is but a dream of fear, no matter what the form it seems to take. The fear is seen within, without, or both. Or it can be disguised in pleasant form. It can be disguised in pleasant form. And then this, one of my favorite lines in the book. The thin disguise of pleasure, and of joy in which the dreams may be wrapped, slightly veils the heavy lump of fear that is their core. Okay? Meaning, you want good stuff to happen to you? Now your ego is satisfied, right? You start getting pulled over to this side because there's a bumper there too, right? You're going to get smacked back as well if you go too far to that side, because the goodness that starts to happen to you and you start taking it in an ego way, it's more illusion. It's wrapped in a veil of illusion. The fact is, it's not the truth. Getting out of this place is being balanced, like Buddha's middle path. Okay? The middle path. It's the story of the three bears. Remember, I'm writing for New Eyes for Little Guys. And the story of the three bears is perfect for this, right? We don't want too hot or too cold. You want that balanced center. The midline is what we're looking for. That's how you find who you really are, right? And it's an integration between the physical self and the spiritual self, which is really an extension. The physical self is an extension of the spiritual self. We are here to be both of those things at the same time in a unified way, right? To not go off the rails one way or another. Most of us spend most of our time bemoaning physical circumstances, but all things working together for good means everything that happens to you is going to push you towards this midline. The Tao, circumstances will complete you. You're going to end up realizing this. All of us do. All of us have the experience of who the divine true self really is. If you can do it while you're here, like the Book of the Dead says, you're liberated. Or you can die and do it. Either way, you're going to do it. All of us will. And so this is why we should rejoice in our sufferings and consider it joy when we face adversity of all kinds, because it's pushing us closer to this midline. Why should we feel blessed instead of talk about victimization? Because the person who takes that victimization and turns it into righteousness by forgiving the other or being merciful, like Jesus says. Again, if you don't love God, you don't need to do this. You can complain and moan all you want about the unfairness of American society. Totally fine. I see the unfairness. But this is a spiritual group with spiritual intention. And we're talking about spiritual things, and spiritual people look at this stuff and they feel blessed and they see the spirit in all of this. And the camel fits through the eye of a needle easier than the rich man because the rich man's head is too big to get through it, right? And that's not a good state to be in, having too much. And so Jesus is the one that's teaching this beautifully. And then the Course of Miracles, which as the story goes, Jesus channeled, or was the author channeled Jesus for that book. It's all things are good. No matter what happens to you, you have to look at it as this is something divine that's being shown to me. I'm being guided there. And the universe is doing it in a way that honestly, I couldn't do it without the universe doing it for me because the ego is so strong. We wouldn't have the courage to go there. So here's a last example, and then I'm going to sit down and we're going to process some real life examples of adversity. Imagine you're walking off a diving board, and there's a bunch of people behind you that know you got to jump, right? There's a fire back there, and you got to get off the diving board into the pool, and you can then swim to safety, okay? And so, it's your dad behind you, and you walk out to the end of the board, and you're afraid to jump, and your dad's like, you got to jump, and you're afraid, and he says, you need to do this. You're going to do this. And so you slowly get down, and you grab the end of the diving board, and then you're hanging off the end of the diving board, right? What would your dad do? Because he loves you. What would he do if your fingers are there? What do you do?
Push you off.
Yeah, well, no, you're already hanging on the end.
Oh, well, then he would step on your fingers.
Yes, he would step on your fingers, wouldn't he? Why? So that you let go, okay? Is letting go good? Yes, this is the third noble truth of Buddhism. You want to stop suffering? You have to let go. All the stuff we're clinging to is causing the suffering. And so when someone who loves you stomps on your fingers so you let go of the board, isn't that a loving act? Well, guess what God and Mother Nature do for us? Knows how to step on our fingers exactly when we need it done, right? To force you to let go. Because you're clinging like, no, I don't want this to be the case. And if you doubt it, wait till you get older and you face your death. Guess what? You're going to be pushed at that point. And if you spent your whole life, remember I love this Tibetan line, we in Tibet spend our whole life preparing to die. You in America spend your whole life hoping you won't. Mm-hmm. So when I sit down, we're going to talk about current adversities. And again, there's a lot of death going on in this country. I don't like it. And at the same time, it's a teacher. It's a left reject. There's a way to take death and put it into our, understanding of things and have a sense of peace on the midline, right? I'm going to have to face it one day too. I might as well think about it now, right? Why spend my whole life hoping I'm not going to die when I know I will? Also, all my loved ones, that'll be fun, right? You get to watch them one by one start to die and then you die. Boy, that's fun. Like maybe I can set up a world for all of eternity where my kids will never die. No, they're going to go too. Everybody will. And eventually this whole earth is going to be burnt to a crisp or freeze. One of those two things will happen. And all of human history will probably be destroyed. Carry on. Or there's this incredible thing that's going on because we're in a matrix, right? This incredible thing that's going on, and we have to get through this narrow gate into the kingdom of heaven, right? And that's like home. That's what's going on. Remember, we're in a dream. What if you fell asleep at night and you got lost in the dream and you forgot to wake up? And you're just in that dream the whole time. Then someone shows up and says, I'm going to kick his butt in this dream. So he wakes up. And in the dream, you start going, no, this is terrible. I'm like, yeah, this is going to help. Boom, right? And then you wake up and you're like, oh, thank goodness you woke me up. Adversity happens to us to help us wake up. The ego hates it. The ego wants to say, I don't want any adversity. The ego just wants the pleasure. If that's all you got, you'd never get out of this place. So we're in a system. It's a yin-yang balance system. Niels Bohr demonstrated it, way back here in chapter 5, that the world, it hinges on balance. There's like 20 cosmological constants that are all about balance. The world is set up just so. Your brain is set up that way, and your life circumstances are set up that way. Your job is to find the midline, walk it, knock down those pins, enter the kingdom of heaven. All right, that's my little spiel. Do we have some comments out there?
We do. Steve, first question is, are you a Sagittarius?
What's your astrological sign?
Okay. Yeah, I'm not good at that. I laugh only because that's one of those things that I need to understand better.
Well, it is. I'll get to that point. But are you by chance?
I don't think so. My birthday is Friday, so I think that's Virgo.
Okay. So actually, then one of the questions is kind of maybe along the lines of astrological questions, and Anthony wanted to know: is there any correlation between the left side of the reject being close to? Sorry, I lost the question here. Is the left, where is it? Is the left Aries and is the right Taurus?
So again, seriously, that above my pay grade.
Okay.
I'm very interested in that, but I haven't got to that yet.
Okay.
Actually, I'll ask him that question. Is it? Because
Yeah,
in the last 6 months, I finally started looking at tarot, and I had no idea. I had no idea how cool it is and how relatable it is. I just thought it was cards and whatever. And so I know that all the astrological stuff means something. I just haven't gone there yet. I mean, I almost feel bad because it's such a good question now. I don't know. Please ask me about Jesus, Krishna, Buddha, or Einstein.
There's different, also just to add to that, there's Vedic astrology, and there's different nuances in that. You might be a sign under one, and then with Vedic astrology, you might be not that same sign. So
Okay.
there's not, the cosmos are really deep study.
I know there's something to it because, all things work together.
Oh, yeah.
So it all works together. I just don't know how. That's too broad for me. But I'm very interested in if they've got some input. That'd be helpful.
Yeah. There's just a few comments back and forth about it, but okay. Otherwise, actually,
I started off as a fail.
No, you didn't. No, that was.
Okay.
It's okay. It's all right. And no other real questions. One comment I liked: life can make you bitter or better. And that's from Stacy. I like that.
There you go. I had a girl.
And then Steve, your whole example here I thought was pretty interesting. And a lot of things we touch on a lot with different ways of looking at it. So this is a new one for us to see the kind of the bowling alley thing. But I keep thinking in my mind about I always butcher his name, but the Nisargadatta Maharaj, where he says, between wisdom and love and how my life flows between the both. So would that be kind of
Exactly.
related there? So
Yeah.
kind of.
Well, remember, wisdom is pretty high level left, okay? Because wisdom gets us to this place where I know that I'm nothing. Love, Maharaj says, is where I know that I'm everything. And you might call that the right for sure, okay? And in between the two, my life flows. See, wisdom is when you come to this realization that what I am as an ego is just conditioned or just chance. Right? I ended up male and I'm a white guy in Western Pennsylvania. And a lot of what happened to me was because of all that. And so wisdom reduces the self. But love, when John says, I must decrease so he may increase, wisdom says, I must decrease, I'm nothing. But love is I am everything. And you're Christ and you're Christ and we all are. That's the unity of things. And so to be one or the other is to be extreme. It's to not have the balance. Why come here if you're just going to realize you're just love all the time? We're here to have that experience. But if you never tap into the realization that you're love, then you're going to stay suffering on the ego side of things.
Did you have a question?
It was just a comment or question about the drawing and the midline and the left and the right. Do you want to say something, or can I ask?
Yeah, I'm holding this so they can hear you.
Oh, sorry. So I'm looking at the drawing, and I imagine that a lot of us sort of, I'm picturing a ball, so bounce from one side to the other kind of radically while we're trying to figure out where we are. And so I'm wondering if, as you kind of spiritually connect with yourself more and you understand that you are trying to find the balance, if that narrows. So
I knew you were going
as
there.
it narrows, right? As it narrows, you don't bounce as far to one side and then back to the other, because it's not such a
But it's
swing.
quicker.
Just like the melodrome that you were talking about, which
Yeah, the
normally
metronome, yeah.
metronome
Yeah.
sways too far one side, and once
Exactly.
you start to balance out, so you start to narrow that pathway by realizing that you're honing in more towards the middle. But
Remember the coin fountain
yes,
example? Yeah.
right.
When it gets closer and closer to the narrow gate, it goes super fast.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have that experience. Sometimes, the head is spinning type of thing. That's what it's like.
Yeah.
But it went again. If I only said one word to you, I was only allowed to say one word to you, and I wanted to pull everything together, it would be the word trust, right? Perhaps God and love would be maybe a little too much. I don't want any negative words, but trust, it works. And you can trust your experiences. They'll get you there. That's sufficient. And so if your head is spinning, what you don't want to do is resist that. And again, nothing wrong with medicine. I work with medicines, okay? The proper use of medicine is very intelligent in mental health and addiction work, right? But it's not the end game, okay? And we can't medicate our issues away, of course. And so you want to trust your emotional state. And if you get to that place where the lanes are narrowing, now, again, the good news is, doesn't it get easier to focus on the target?
Yeah.
Somewhere in here, right about here, and I know because I got a lot of feedback from people that are subscribers on our channel, is where the dark night of the soul happens, okay? Dark nights of the soul don't happen over here. They happen to the person that's here because it's like chemotherapy. At the end, when you're getting close to realizing who you really are, the stuff gets intense. I didn't swear there just in case there's kids watching, right? Stuff gets intense. It's more difficult there because the ego is just totally desperately clinging to us and wants to stay on board. And yet you need to extinguish that thing, or at least get all aspects of self-serving out of the way. Remember, love another as oneself ultimately means I want you to do it as much as I do it, and I want you to do it as much as I do it collectively. I must love Democrats and Republicans equally. Doesn't mean I vote for them, but I must love them equally. I want to cross the finish line with everybody. That's loving thy enemy, including my own issues and my own stuff. I know you've said that many times before. Being mad at myself, that is often my enemy, and I need to forgive self as well. So there's a dark night of the soul that happens toward the end, and boy, doesn't that hurt, okay? But that's because you're super close. It's very spinny, and it's a crucifixion of sorts. But it's happening to do what? Just read this today. I think it's actually, it was the Kabbalah teaching. It's because you don't have the ability to do it on your own. You as an ego, physical self, with your limited human capabilities, can't do it without God carrying you across the finish line. Otherwise, man could boast. Like, who needs Jesus? Who needs that Buddha and all that wisdom? I'm just going to use physical world stuff to get to the kingdom of heaven. Didn't they try to build the Tower of Babel already? And didn't work. The whole point is you can't do it physically. You need another gear. In your case, we call it wolf. And that other gear, when you submit and the ego part of you steps out of the way, that other gear, connecting to God, if you will, then carries you across the line. That's why it's narrow and it's why it's intense. And as a therapist, again, I can tell a major difference between what you might call the melodramatic histrionics, okay, who are creating their own miseries, or experiencing it unnecessarily because they refuse to go on this path, versus someone who's actually being crucified. Both sides might feel miserable, but one is almost done.
Stacy wants to know, why is the pull so strong to the left?
Well, I quote Einstein, because the illusion is very persistent. And because the ego's, the Kabbalah teaches this, the ego's very nature is to desire pleasure for me, to your exclusion. That's the one extreme. Ego, me pleasure, you I don't care about. Then you got a lot of people in the middle, like, I want pleasure, but I want you to have pleasure too. But I get a lot of pleasure from your pleasure. So really, it's just more pleasure for me still, right? And it's really hard to let that go. So the pull is, that's why we get addicted. Remember, we get addicted to how many things in Kabbalah and Israel? And
613.
Okay, in the Torah. It's 613. Competing desires for the one thing you can get addicted to. And that one thing you're allowed to get addicted to is the spirit. Why is it difficult? Because there's a whole lot of temptation out there. And the very nature of the ego is to get addicted to that. That's why it's a challenging game. We have to learn how to overcome that by getting addicted to the one thing that works. Good?
Yeah, she says she loves the answer, and thank you. This question we talked about actually a week or two ago, and I really personally, not that I'm considering it, but I'm very, very curious about this. And the question is, what are the spiritual ramifications of suicide in relation to this?
Yeah, okay, in relation to this?
Well, I guess maybe just in general, we'll just start kind of a sidebar topic.
Well, keeping it extremely general, because there's a wide array for what suicide is and why it could be and reasons and all that stuff. But the whole of reality, and again, I got a lot of this from the idea of what samsara is in Buddhism and Hinduism, the idea of the wheel of life. And there is in the book, in Course in Miracles says, paraphrasing, on this point, don't equivocate. There is no such thing as death. I've worked with families, of course, of people who have completed suicide, and there's good news and bad news, which is to say, well, there's not an eternal lake of fire, okay? The whole of reality of samsara is left, reject, and right adduct, okay? Even for someone who's died via suicide. That means their game keeps going, but it's not an extinguishing of the game. The pain doesn't end per se. There's still more challenges to be had. And the game continues in such a way where that person still has to learn whatever it is that they have to learn. And so it's a continuing of consciousness. There's not an escape to it. There's an eternal nature to it. And the good news is everybody ends up there. Everybody sees their loved ones again, as you might say. And so suicide, death, tragedy, whatever, there's plenty. Most of us are going to die, let's say 80-ish, not having finished this game. And so you get another little body again, you get to do it again. And so the best way to say it is why we shouldn't commit suicide is because that kicks the can down the curb, so to speak. You're going to have to reset, but you don't lose the adversities. They're going to come in another form. I call it whack-a-mole. Whatever your adversities are yours now in this current form, if you were to take on somebody else's issues, they have the same adversities, but in a different form. And so a person who has an issue that they can't quite overcome and they take their lives as a result, they don't get to escape that. That's what you might call the bad news. But honestly, when you consider my very strong feeling that we all suffer the same amount given enough time, the suicide in many ways suffers greatly in a shorter period of time, but that also means they can learn from it quickly. My experience on this is on the other side, in the afterlife, in samsara, which you can't escape. There's a reckoning, there's a recognition of like, uh-oh, what did I just do? And that'll hasten the process. Remember, all things work together for good. I can't look at an issue like that and go, oh, but that one's bad. All things have to work together for good. Good. How about you guys? Anybody want to jump in?
I was thinking, just as anyone else would die of natural causes, they still have to go through the things that they didn't learn in this life, just like anyone would.
Yeah, sure. Right. What I know about that topic, having felt some feelings like that and also been around a lot of other people, dark night of the soul means you're almost done. But you know what? That's a really painful place. And most everybody that goes to that place wants to die because it seems so pointless. And why are we here? It's such a foregone conclusion that there's all this suffering. And if that's when it happens, well, you're still not that far from the end. If it happens over here, well, there's a lot of learning to go. But like you said, whether it's tragic death, accidental death, old age, it doesn't change anything. There's only one game in town, getting across the narrow gate into this thing called the kingdom of heaven. You had to leave. Did you want to comment? Because I know you said you had to.
No, I'm good.
Oh, you're good now?
Oh, well, I'm good till 7:30.
Oh, okay. You have nothing to say?
Not right now.
You already said hi to the world when you walked in. All right. Anybody else?
Processing.
Well, then I'm going to bring up the what I promised today in my little teaser that I was going to talk about COVID and pandemic and all that, and how to look at this circumstance in a all things working together way. Okay. For sure, the very strong opinions people have about their certain circumstances are relative to them because other people have other opinions, right? And in each case, the degree, listen to the teaching, Jesus, the measure by which you judge, you shall also be judged. Okay. When you look at someone else and you judge them for their opinion, and you do so with some sort of resentment, bitterness, or whatever, some sort of negative value in your heart, okay? You're going to get smacked off the left. That's going to happen for a bunch of different reasons. That's clear. Now, can you midline disagree with someone? Oh, absolutely. Jesus did all the time, flipping over the tables and calling Peter Satan and, on and on. You can be very balanced and disagree, right? You could be smacked right there, and you could probably be in the kingdom of heaven and disagree with someone on earth going, what are you doing? You should do this, okay? But there would be zero level of any type of animosity. This world is loaded with fear and shame and guilt. We don't need to add more of it. We need to add more spirit to it. And then, again, still disagree. And so I've never found anything more perfect, really, than what has happened with this pandemic and how you get a choice. You want to be polarized? Again, I know I say it all the time. I'm not telling you to change your opinion. I'm telling you to put the spirit first. That's all. Remember, just being. You can do whatever you want. But being is recognizing we're all playing the same game. The only way out of this is to drop all of that at some point and realize death itself is nothing to fear, right? If anything, death is something to celebrate. Wouldn't we be in a much better position if we understood what death really is? The transitioning or the waking from a dream? Now, again, we want spiritual people to think that way because some people who are maybe not quite as far along in the path might take advantage of that idea, and surely some people have. The Joker in the Batman series comes to mind because he wasn't afraid of death because he knew it was just a cartoon. If you didn't know that, that was his superhero skill. He knew he could die and the cartoonist would write him back in. Okay, he knew he wasn't killing anybody. Did the Joker? That got set up in the 50s, as I understand it. If anybody out there knows more about the Joker, they can chime in. But if you knew this was a dream that no one could actually die, now it's like, sweet, now I can just go purge, right? All right, but that doesn't get the job done. You dropping all forms of ego, all forms of identity, all forms of illusion, and you then proceeding includes recognizing that I can live in a world where everybody disagrees with me and I don't lose my mind over it. That's the essence of Namaste. You're going to wear a mask and get vaxxed? Namaste. Oh, you're not going to wear a mask and get vaxxed? Namaste. And then I could sit back and let the bumpers take care of you, right? Karma's a thing. Jesus says you reap what you sow. That is karma. I mean, they're teaching the same stuff. And you're going to experience what you need to experience. If you need to get whacked off the left rail, you're going to. If it's going to get whacked off the right rail, you're going to get whacked, right? And there's nothing I can really do to stop that other than suggest, hey, maybe we'd be more spirited about it. All right. You look like you're looking at something.
Yeah, I'm trying to, this must have been in commentary to something you had said earlier, but for 300 years, the Romans and Christians burned witches and people that practiced this sort of science because they knew how to ascend back then. They knew how to read the stars. So I was just trying to figure out where the question was in there, or where the comment was, and how it was.
Well, it's that I should probably close the door because I'm going to get burned at the stake before too long. I mean, that's sort of what it is. The magic, again, when I got into it, I'll never forget this one young lady who was Wiccan, and she started teaching me about all this stuff too. I'm like, wait, this is like similar to all these other big teachings, right? I even looked into Satanism for a while, and there's some good logic in there that's actually similar. We should do that sometime, right? And remember, all things work together for those who love God. That includes Satan. I'm just saying, part of all things. If you will, Satan is the left reject, the thing that causes the pain, right? So it all works together. But that's why in New Eyes, I talked about why many secret societies went underground. Because the people that started to play with this stuff, like back in old Europe or whatever, they were peasants. And they're like, wait a minute, this king doesn't have control over me. There's another type of king out there, you could say spiritual, or at the same time, I don't have to put up with all this injustice either, right? And so what did the kings and queens do? Off with their heads, right? You can't think that way. You must think like the sheep I want you to be. So, which is along those lines, same thing. They started to talk like this and they would get in trouble. And that still happens in the world today. Other cultures are very restrictive and some religions are very restrictive too with that. So yeah, we're working on the same sort of thing.
Stacy's asking, she wants to know, who is the I that reincarnates?
Awesome question. So who wants to take that one? It is the same thing. You know, you could call it the is or the great I am or whatever. Some people like the word soul, okay? And if you like that word, fine. Others say life stream. I keep moving a little closer to that. It's energy, it's a vibration type of consciousness, or it's all of us collectively, which I'm also very comfortable with. The I is God, which is all of us, and we're each an individual form of that God, like an ocean has a lot of little drops. And so it's the oneness of things. So when she says that, it's me, it's her, it's all of you, it's all of us. But actually, just was reading this in Kabbalah too. Our destiny is to be unified. Our destiny is to appreciate each other's differences in a unified way. Again, that's what makes music interesting, and various restaurants we go to in different parts of the world. They're different, but it's all part of the same. And so the I is God, the great I am, of which we are all a part.
The question was actually by Blundering Tusk, not Stacy. Sorry about that.
Okay, you got to get that right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Blundering Tusk. Okay, that's a good name. All right, 2 minutes left for our audience out there. Anything else? Bob, closing comments?
No, I'm good. I'm not a good bowler.
Okay. Okay. Now, the thing about that, though, is that's a good comment. We're all being trained to be good bowler, though.
Correct.
So by the end of it, you're going to be nailing strike after strike.
Right.
Good way to end it. All right. Thank you very much. Namaste. All right. Make sure you comment when we're actually offline.